I stepped into the bustling kitchen of Rosemary's Bistro, the scent of fresh pastries and simmering sauces mingling in the air. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my chef's hat, trying to steady my nerves for the day ahead. "Joanna, where's that lemon meringue pie for table 7? Chef Marcus barked from across the room. "Coming right up, chef." I called back, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. I hurried to the dessert station, carefully retrieving the pie from the refrigerator. As I turned to deliver it, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. "Here you go, chef," I said, presenting the pie with a flourish. Marcus nodded curtly. "Not bad, Joanna. Now get started on those eclairs for the Johnsons' anniversary party." I breathed a sigh of relief and headed back to my station. As I began piping the choux pastry, my phone buzzed again. Curiosity got the better of me, and I snuck a quick glance at the screen. 2 missed calls from William. My heart skipped a beat. William, my high school sweetheart, the man I'd been with for over a decade. We'd been going through a rough patch lately, but I was sure we'd work it out. We always did. "Earth to Joanna?" A voice startled me out of my reverie. It was Andrew, my friendly coworker, grinning at me from the other side of the counter. "You okay there? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a little distracted. How are those croquembouches coming along?" Andrew's eyes twinkled. "Oh, you know me. I'm the king of cream puffs." I laughed, grateful for the distraction. "Don't let Chef Marcus hear you say that. He might make you prove it in a bake-off." As we worked side by side, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. William never called during my shifts unless it was an emergency. The rest of the day passed in a blur of sugar and flour and butter. By the time I hung up my apron, I was exhausted but proud of the day's work. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, my phone rang again. William's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, stranger," I answered, trying to keep my tone light. "What's with all the calls today?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Joe, we need to talk." My stomach dropped. Those 4 words never meant anything good. "Okay," I said slowly. "I'm just leaving work. Want me to come over?" "No," he replied quickly. "Let's meet at Riverside Park, our usual spot." 15 minutes later, I found William sitting on our favorite bench overlooking the river. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, making him look older, more serious than I'd ever seen him. "What's going on, Will?" I asked, sitting down beside him. He took a deep breath. "Joanna, I can't do this anymore. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut." "What do you mean?" "Us. This relationship, it's not working." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I think we both know it's been over for a while now." "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the rushing water. "We can fix this. We always do." William shook his head. "Not this time, Joe. I'm sorry, but I've made up my mind." Tears stung my eyes as the reality of his words sank in. "Is there someone else?" His silence was all the answer I needed. I stood up abruptly, my legs shaking. "How long? Joe, please. How long? William," I demanded, my voice rising. He sighed. "A few months. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." I stumbled backward, feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. 12 years of memories, hopes, and dreams shattered in an instant. "I hope you'll be very happy together," I spat, turning on my heel. As I walked away, leaving behind the only man I'd ever loved, I realized with startling clarity that my life would never be the same again. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with heartache and challenges I couldn't yet imagine. But one thing was clear. I, Joanna Hayes, would have to find a way to pick up the pieces and move forward. Somehow. The weeks after William's betrayal blurred together in a haze of heartache and vanilla extract. I threw myself into my work, desperately trying to fill the void he'd left behind. But even the sweetest pastries tasted bitter on my tongue. One particularly grueling afternoon, as I struggled with a temperamental batch of macarons, I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Hey, Joe, why don't you take a break?" Andrew's kind voice cut through my frustration. I sighed, wiping a smear of powdered sugar from my cheek. "I can't. These need to be perfect for the Johnson wedding tomorrow." Andrew's eyes crinkled with concern. "You've been pushing yourself too hard lately. Come on, I'll cover for you. Just 15 minutes, okay?" Reluctantly, I nodded and followed him out to the small courtyard behind the bistro. The crisp autumn air was a welcome respite from the stuffy kitchen. "So," Andrew said, leaning against the brick wall. Want to talk about what's really bothering you? I hesitated, then the words tumbled out in a rush. William left me, for someone else, after 12 years. Just gone. Andrew's face softened with sympathy. Oh, Joe, I'm so sorry. That's awful. I just feel so stupid, I confessed, tears pricking at my eyes. I thought we were happy. I thought we had a future. Hey, you're not stupid, Andrew said firmly. You trusted someone you loved. There's nothing stupid about that. His words were like a balm to my wounded heart. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd be okay. As the days passed, Andrew became my rock. He covered for me when I needed a moment to collect myself, made me laugh with his terrible puns, and slowly coaxed me out of my shell. One evening, as we closed up the bistro, Andrew surprised me with a small velvet box. What's this? I asked, puzzled. He grinned sheepishly. Just a little something to remind you that you're not alone. Inside the box was a delicate, heart-shaped locket. I gasped, running my finger over the intricate engraving. Andrew, it's beautiful, but I can't accept this. It's too much. He shook his head. It's not too much. It's a token of friendship, to remind you that there are still good people in the world who care about you. Tears welled up in my eyes as I clasped the locket around my neck. Thank you, I whispered. I'll keep it always. As weeks turned into months, I found myself looking forward to seeing Andrew each day. His warm smile and unwavering support slowly helped mend the cracks in my heart. One Saturday, as we worked side by side on a towering wedding cake, our hands brushed. A jolt of electricity shot through me, and I jerked away, nearly toppling the cake in the process. Whoa there. Andrew steadied the tears, laughing. You okay? I nodded, my cheeks burning. What was wrong with me? This was Andrew, my friend and co-worker. I couldn't be developing feelings for him. Could I? That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself absent-mindedly toying with the locket. Thoughts of Andrew filled my mind, bringing a smile to my face. For the first time since William left, I felt a flutter of excitement about the future. The next morning, I woke to a text from my father. My stomach dropped as I read his terse message. We need to talk. Come by the house after work. All day, anxiety gnawed at me. Dad and I had never been close, especially after Mom died. What could he possibly want to discuss? As I pulled up to his weathered farmhouse that evening, I saw him waiting on the porch, his face set in grim lines. Hi, Dad, I said cautiously, climbing the creaky steps. He nodded curtly. Joanna, come inside. There's something I need to say. I followed him into the cluttered living room. Perching nervously on the edge of the sofa, Dad paced for a moment, then turned to face me, his eyes landing on the locket around my neck. Where did you get that? He demanded. Instinctively, my hand flew to the pendant. It was a gift. From a friend at work. Why? Dad's face darkened. A friend, huh? Would this friend happen to be that Andrew fella you're always talking about? I frowned, confused by his tone. Yes, but... Joanna, he cut me off, his voice low and serious. I don't want you seeing that man anymore. He's trouble. Mark my words. Anger flared in my chest. What are you talking about? You don't even know him. Dad's jaw clenched. I know enough, and I'm telling you, as your father, to stay away from him. I stood up, my hands shaking. You can't tell me who to be friends with. I'm not a child anymore, Dad. As I stormed out of the house, my father's words echoed in my ears. What did he know about Andrew that I didn't? And why, despite my anger, did a seed of doubt take root in my heart? My father's warning about Andrew haunted me for days. I tried to shake it off, telling myself he was just being overprotective, but doubt lingered like a persistent shadow. One morning, as I arrived at the bistro, Andrew greeted me with a dazzling smile. Morning, Joe. I've got a surprise for you. He led me to the kitchen, where a beautiful array of pastries awaited. I've been practicing those French techniques you showed me. What do you think? My heart swelled with pride and affection. How could my father possibly think this man was trouble? They're perfect, Andrew, I said, squeezing his hand. You're amazing. His eyes sparkled as he pulled me close. Not as amazing as you, Joe. Before I knew what was happening, his lips were on mine. The kiss was soft, sweet, and felt like coming home. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless. I've wanted to do that for so long, Andrew whispered. I smiled, all thoughts of my father's warning evaporating. Me too. The next few months were a whirlwind of happiness. Andrew and I threw ourselves into our relationship with the same passion we brought to our baking. Every moment felt magical, like we were living in our own private fairy tale. On a crisp autumn evening, Andrew surprised me with a picnic in the park where William had broken my heart. As we sat on a blanket, surrounded by twinkling fairy lights, he got down on one knee. "Joanna," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've brought so much joy into my life. Will you marry me?" Tears of happiness streamed down my face as I nodded. "Yes! 1,000 times yes!" The next day, I drove to my father's house, eager to share the news. But as I pulled up, I saw him waiting on the porch, his face like thunder. "I heard about your engagement," he said gruffly as I approached. I frowned. "How did you—" "Small town," he interrupted. "News travels fast. Joanna, I'm begging you, don't do this." Anger flared in my chest. "I love him, Dad. Why can't you be happy for me?" "Because I know men like him," he growled. "Charming on the outside, rotten on the inside. He'll hurt you, mark my words." "You don't know anything about him," I shouted. "You've never even given him a chance." Dad's face softened slightly. "Joanna, please, your mother would." "Don't you dare bring Mom into this," I hissed. "She would have wanted me to be happy. She would have wanted you to be smart," he countered. We stood in tense silence for a moment before I turned to leave. "I'm marrying Andrew, Dad, with or without your blessing." As I drove away, tears blurring my vision, I made a decision. If my father couldn't accept the man I loved, then I didn't need him in my life. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of planning and preparation. Andrew was a dream, handling every detail with care and enthusiasm. But as the big day approached, a nagging feeling grew in the pit of my stomach. On the morning of our wedding, I stood in front of the mirror in my white gown, fingering the locket Andrew had given me. A knock at the door startled me. "Joanna?" It was my father's gruff voice. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then called out, "It's open." He entered, looking uncomfortable in his ill-fitting suit. His eyes widened as he took in my appearance. "You look just like your mother," he said softly. For a moment I felt a pang of regret for our estrangement. But then I remembered his harsh words about Andrew. "What do you want, Dad?" I asked coldly. He sighed heavily. "I came to give you this." He held out a small, worn envelope. "It's from your mother. She wrote it before she died, made me promise to give it to you on your wedding day." With trembling hands, I took the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in my mother's familiar handwriting. As I read her words of love and advice, tears streamed down my face. But the last line made my blood run cold. "Trust your instincts, my darling. If something feels wrong, it probably is." I looked up at my father, confusion and fear warring in my heart. "Dad, what—" Suddenly there was a commotion outside. The door burst open, and Andrew rushed in, his face flushed with anger. "What's he doing here?" he demanded, glaring at my father. As I stood there, caught between the two men, I realized with startling clarity that this was the moment that would define the rest of my life. And I had no idea what to do. The honeymoon phase of our marriage faded faster than a soufflé taken out of the oven too soon. Within weeks of our return from Bali, I noticed subtle changes in Andrew's behavior. His once warm smiles became tight-lipped and forced. His gentle touches turned into rough grabs. One evening, as I prepared dinner in our new kitchen, Andrew stormed in, slamming his briefcase on the counter. "Rough day?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He glared at me. "What's this?" He held up a piece of mail. My heart sank as I recognized the return address. It's just a card from my dad." Andrew's eyes narrowed. "I thought I told you to cut ties with him. He's nothing but trouble, Joanna." "He's my father," I protested weakly. "He's a small-town nobody who doesn't understand our world," Andrew snapped. "Just like your mother was." The wooden spoon I'd been holding clattered to the floor. "What did you say about my mother?" Andrew's lip curled in disgust. "Oh, come on, Joanna. We both know she was just some country bumpkin who got lucky marrying your father. It's no wonder you turned out the way you did." Tears stung my eyes as I struggled to recognize the man before me. This couldn't be the same Andrew who had held me so tenderly, who had promised to love me forever. "How dare you?" I whispered. "You don't know anything about my mother." He laughed coldly. "I know enough, and let me tell you, sweetheart, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." I felt like I'd been slapped. What's that supposed to mean? Andrew stalked towards me, his eyes glinting with malice. "It means you're just like her, weak, naive, always playing the victim." My hands shook as I backed away from him. Andrew, please, this isn't you. Oh, but it is, he sneered. You just never bothered to see it, too busy living in your little fairy tale world of sugar and spice. As his words sank in, a terrible realization dawned on me. My father had been right all along. Andrew wasn't the man I thought he was. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Andrew's cruel comments became a daily occurrence. He criticized my cooking, mocked my dreams of opening my own bakery, and constantly reminded me how lucky I was that he had rescued me from my pathetic small-town life. I threw myself into my work at the bistro, desperately trying to hold on to the passion that had once defined me. But even there, Andrew's influence seeped in like poison. One afternoon, as I was preparing for a high-profile catering event, Andrew showed up unexpectedly. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. He smirked. "Just checking up on my little wifey, making sure you're not embarrassing me." As he peered over my shoulder at the intricate sugar flowers I'd been crafting, his face twisted in disgust. "Is this really the best you can do?" he scoffed. "No wonder you're still stuck in this dead-end job." Something inside me snapped. "That's enough, Andrew. I won't let you talk to me like this anymore." His eyes flashed dangerously. "Oh? And what are you going to do about it? Leave me? Good luck surviving without me, sweetheart. You're nothing without me." As he stormed out, leaving me shaken and humiliated in front of my colleagues, I clutched the heart-shaped locket around my neck. The symbol of hope and love it once represented now felt like a chain, binding me to a man I no longer recognized. That night, as I lay awake in our bed, Andrew's soft snores beside me, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this anymore. I had to find a way out. But as I formulated my escape plan, a chilling thought stopped me cold. What if Andrew was right? What if I really was nothing without him? The doubt crept in, paralyzing me with fear. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could stay and endure Andrew's abuse, clinging to the memory of the man I thought I'd married. Or I could take a leap into the unknown, risking everything for a chance at freedom. The choice was mine, and mine alone. But as I fingered the locket around my neck, my mother's words from her letter echoed in my mind. "Trust your instincts, my darling. If something feels wrong, it probably is." With a deep breath, I made my choice. Now I just had to find the courage to follow through. I woke up early on a crisp autumn morning, my heart heavy with purpose. Today was my mother's birthday, and I was determined to honor her memory in the only way I knew how, by baking her famous apple spice cake. As I gathered the ingredients, I could almost hear her voice guiding me through the recipe. "Remember, Joanna," she'd say, "the secret is in the love you put into it." Hours passed as I lovingly crafted each layer, infusing it with memories of happier times. The kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of cinnamon and nutmeg, a stark contrast to the tension that had become a constant in our home. Just as I was putting the finishing touches on the frosting, Andrew burst into the kitchen. "What's all this?" he demanded, eyeing the mess on the counters. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "It's my mother's birthday cake. I make it every year to remember her." Andrew's face twisted into a sneer. "Your mother again? When are you going to let go of the past, Joanna? It's pathetic." His words stung, but I refused to let him see how much they hurt. "This is important to me, Andrew. I'd appreciate it if you could respect that." He laughed coldly. "Respect? For what? A dead woman's recipe?" Before I could react, he strode over to the cake and plunged his finger into the delicate frosting, ruining the design I'd spent hours perfecting. "Stop it," I cried, trying to push him away. But Andrew was stronger. With a cruel glint in his eye, he grabbed the cake and marched towards the trash can. "No, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Andrew, don't!" It was too late. In one swift motion, he dumped the entire cake into the garbage, frosting side down. I stared at the trash can in disbelief. My mother's beloved recipe now, nothing more than a mess of crumbs and icing. "There," Andrew said, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Now you can focus on more important things, like being a proper wife." As he left the kitchen, whistling cheerfully, something inside me shattered. This wasn't just about a cake. It was about my memories, my heritage, everything that made me who I was. I sank to the floor, sobs racking my body. How had I let things get this far? How had I become so blind to Andrew's true nature? As I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of my ruined creation, A memory surfaced. My mother standing in this very kitchen teaching me how to bake. "Joanna," she'd said, her eyes twinkling, "remember that you're made of stronger stuff than flour and sugar. When life knocks you down, you dust yourself off and start again." Slowly, I rose to my feet. With trembling hands, I retrieved the cake from the trash. It was a mess, but not completely destroyed. For the next few hours, I worked tirelessly to salvage what I could. I smoothed out the dents, patched the holes with extra frosting, and added new decorations to cover the imperfections. By the time I finished, the cake wasn't perfect, but it was whole again. As I looked at my creation, I realized it was a reflection of myself, battered, but not broken. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't change Andrew, but I could change how I responded to him. No more cowering, no more accepting his abuse. I carefully boxed up the cake and grabbed my car keys. There was someone I needed to see. As I drove towards my father's house, my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. I knew this visit wouldn't be easy, but it was long overdue. The sun was setting as I pulled into his driveway, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car, cake in hand. Before I could even knock, the front door swung open. My father stood there, his weathered face a mix of surprise and concern. "Joanna?" he said gruffly. "What are you doing here?" I held out the battered cake, my voice barely above a whisper. "Happy birthday, Mom. I think I need your help, Dad." As understanding dawned in his eyes, I felt the first glimmer of hope I'd experienced in months. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would reclaim my strength and fight for the life I deserved. The weeks following my visit to Dad's house were a blur of hushed phone calls and clandestine meetings. With his help, I began planning my escape from Andrew's suffocating grip. But as the day of reckoning approached, my nerves frayed like overworked pie crust. One crisp autumn morning, I steeled myself for what I knew would be the hardest conversation of my life. Andrew sat at the kitchen table, scowling at his phone as I set a plate of French toast in front of him, his favorite. "Andrew," I began, my voice steadier than I felt, "we need to talk." He looked up, irritation flickering across his face. "What is it now, Joanna? I'm busy." I took a deep breath. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air like a fog, thick and oppressive. For a moment, Andrew just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he erupted into laughter. "A divorce," he sneered. "Don't be ridiculous. Where would you go? What would you do? You're nothing without me, remember?" His words, once so cutting, now felt hollow. I squared my shoulders. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm leaving today, Andrew." The amusement drained from his face, replaced by a cold fury I'd seen too many times before. He stood slowly, looming over me. "You ungrateful bitch," he snarled. "After everything I've done for you, you'd be nothing but a small-town nobody if it wasn't for me." I flinched but held my ground. Maybe so, but I'd rather be a nobody than live another day like this. What happened next was a blur of motion and pain. Andrew's hand connected with my cheek, the force of the slap sending me stumbling backward. As I clutched my stinging face, a strange calm washed over me. This was it, the final push I needed. "Thank you," I said quietly. Andrew blinked, confusion replacing anger. "What?" "Thank you," I repeated, "for showing me exactly who you are. I won't forget it." Before he could react, I bolted for the door. My bag was already packed and hidden in the trunk of my car. As I peeled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of Andrew in the rearview mirror, his face contorted with rage. My hands shook as I drove, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I'd done it. I'd finally broken free. But the relief I'd expected didn't come. Instead, a crushing wave of fear and uncertainty threatened to overwhelm me. What now? Where would I go? How would I survive? As if in answer to my silent questions, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Maggie, the owner of Sweet Dreams Bakery in the next town over. "Job's yours if you want it. When can you start?" A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. It was really happening. I was starting over. I pulled into a rest stop, needing a moment to collect myself. As I sat there, trying to steady my breathing, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. A bruise was already forming on my cheek where Andrew had struck me. Anger flared in my chest, hot and righteous. How dare he? How dare he try to break me, to make me feel small and worthless? In that moment, something shifted inside me. The fear and uncertainty didn't disappear, but they were joined by something else. Determination. I may have lost everything, but I refused to let Andrew take my spirit. I pulled out my phone and dialed Maggie's number. "Maggie, it's Joanna. I can start today." As I hung up, I noticed a missed call from my father. My thumb hovered over the callback button, a lump forming in my throat. We'd made progress, but things were still fragile between us. What if he thought I was weak for letting things get this far with Andrew? Before I could second-guess myself, I hit call. It rang once, twice. "Joanna?" My father's gruff voice came through the speaker. "Are you okay? Did you do it?" I took a shaky breath. "Yeah, Dad. I did it. I'm free." There was a long pause, and for a moment I feared he'd hung up. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, he said, "I'm proud of you, kiddo." Tears sprang to my eyes, a mix of relief, grief, and hope. As I pulled back onto the highway, heading towards my new life, I realized that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would reclaim my strength, rebuild my life, and maybe, just maybe, find happiness again. But little did I know, the hardest part of my journey was yet to come. The early morning silence was shattered by the shrill ring of my phone. Groggily, I fumbled for it, my heart racing as I saw the caller ID. Dad's neighbor, Mrs. Thompson. "Joanna?" Her voice trembled. "I'm so sorry, dear. Your father, he's gone." The world tilted on its axis. I sat there numb as Mrs. Thompson's words washed over me. Heart attack. In his sleep. Peaceful. Peaceful. The word echoed in my mind, a cruel joke. There had been nothing peaceful about our relationship these past few years. And now, just when we were starting to mend things, I moved through the next few days in a haze of grief and regret. Arranging the funeral. Sorting through Dad's belongings. Each task a painful reminder of the time we'd lost. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and misty, fitting my mood perfectly. As I stood before the mirror, fastening the heart-shaped locket Andrew had given me so long ago, a wave of bitterness washed over me. How different would things have been if I'd listened to Dad's warnings about Andrew? At the cemetery, I was surprised by the number of people who'd come to pay their respects. Dad had always been a loner, but it seemed he'd touched more lives than I'd realized. As the minister spoke, I let my gaze wander over the crowd. And then I saw him, Andrew, standing at the back, his face a mask of false sympathy. Anger flared in my chest. How dare he show up here, after everything he'd done? I was so focused on Andrew that I almost missed the minister's final words. And now Joanna would like to say a few words about her father. Panic gripped me as I made my way to the podium. What could I possibly say? How could I sum up a lifetime of love, disappointment, and missed opportunities? I took a deep breath, my hand unconsciously going to the locket around my neck, and suddenly I knew what to say. "My father wasn't an easy man to love," I began, my voice shaky. He was stubborn, set in his ways, and terrible at expressing his feelings, but he loved fiercely and protected those he cared about with everything he had. As I spoke, I saw Andrew shifting uncomfortably in the back. Good. He tried to warn me about the dangers in my life, even when I didn't want to listen, and in the end, when I needed him most, he was there. I only wish, my voice broke, tears streaming down my face. I only wish I'd had more time to tell him how much he meant to me. As I stepped down from the podium, a strange hush fell over the crowd, and then, to my horror, I saw Andrew making his way towards me. "Joanna," he said, his voice dripping with false concern, "I'm so sorry for your loss." I stiffened, ready to tell him exactly where he could shove his sympathy. But before I could speak, he continued, "I know this is a difficult time, but there's something we need to discuss." His eyes flickered to the locket around my neck. "That necklace? It belonged to your father, didn't it?" I frowned, confused. "What? No, you gave this to me." Andrew's lips curved into a smile that sent chills down my spine. "Actually, I bought it from your father years ago. He needed money, and well, I saw an opportunity. It's a family heirloom, quite valuable. Now that he's gone, I'd like it back." The world seemed to tilt again as the implications of his words sank in. Dad had sold a family heirloom to Andrew? And Andrew had given it to me, knowing its true value all along? "You're lying," I hissed, my hand clasping protectively around the locket. Andrew's eyes hardened. "I'm not, and unless you want things to get ugly, you'll hand it over. Now." As we stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills, I felt something inside me snap. This man had taken so much from me already, my confidence, my self-worth, years of my life. And now he wanted to take this last connection to my father? No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You won't take this from me. You won't take anything else from me ever again. Andrew's face contorted with rage, his hand reaching for the locket. But before he could touch it, a strong voice cut through the tension. Is there a problem here? We both turned to see Landon, my father's oldest friend and respected local businessman, standing nearby. His eyes, usually twinkling with mischief, were hard as flint as he stared Andrew down. As Landon stepped between us, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone in this fight as I'd thought. Landon's presence seemed to fill the entire cemetery, his imposing figure a shield between Andrew and me. The tension crackled in the air like static electricity. Mr. Hawthorne, Andrew said, his voice dripping with false charm, this is a private matter between my wife and me. Landon's eyes narrowed. Ex-wife, I believe, and any matter concerning Joanna's well-being is my concern, especially today. I felt a surge of gratitude towards Landon, but Andrew wasn't backing down. That locket, he hissed, pointing at my neck, is a valuable antique. It belongs to me. Landon's eyebrows shot up. Is that so? Funny, I remember George showing me that locket years ago, said it was a family heirloom meant for Joanna. Andrew's face paled. That's not true. I have proof of purchase. Do you now? Landon's voice was dangerously calm. I'd be very interested to see that, considering I was with George the day he had that locket appraised. It's worth a small fortune, isn't it, Andrew? The pieces suddenly fell into place. Andrew's insistence on me wearing the locket, his rage when I'd misplaced it once. It had never been about sentimentality. It had always been about the money. You knew, I whispered, my voice shaking with anger. All this time, you knew what it was worth. Andrew's mask of civility finally cracked. So what if I did? You were too stupid to realize its value, just like you were too stupid to see how worthless you really are. His words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. But this time, they didn't wound me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. No, Andrew, I said, my voice steady. The only worthless thing here is you. Before Andrew could respond, Landon stepped forward. I think it's time for you to leave, Mr. Hawthorne, and I'd advise against any further attempts to harass Joanna, unless, of course, you'd like me to reconsider that business deal we discussed last week. Andrew's face contorted with rage, but he knew he was beaten. With one last venomous glare in my direction, he stormed off, leaving only the echo of his angry footsteps behind. As the adrenaline of the confrontation faded, I felt my knees go weak. Landon's strong hand steadied me. You okay, kiddo? He asked, his voice gentle. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Landon guided me to a nearby bench, away from the curious stares of the remaining mourners. Your dad would be proud of you, he said softly. He always knew you had it in you to stand up for yourself. Tears welled up in my eyes. I wish I'd done it sooner, that I'd listened to him about Andrew. Landon shook his head. George understood more than you know. He knew you had to find your own way, make your own mistakes. That's why he left you this. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, handing it to me with a sad smile. He asked me to give it to you after the funeral. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, written in my father's familiar scrawl. Joanna, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you in person how proud I am of you. You've always been stronger than you knew, sweetheart. That strength got you through some tough times, and it'll get you through whatever comes next. The locket you're wearing, it's more than just a piece of jewelry. It's a reminder of where you come from, and the strength of the women in our family. Your great-grandmother wore it as she built a new life in a strange country. Your grandmother wore it as she ran the family farm single-handedly during the war, and your mother, well, she wore it every day of her life, facing each challenge with grace and determination. Now it's your turn, Joanna. Wear it with pride, and remember, you come from a long line of survivors, and you're the strongest of us all. I love you, kiddo. Always have, always will. As I finished reading, I felt something shift inside me. The weight of grief and regret I'd been carrying lightened, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and strength. I looked up at Landon, who was watching me with a knowing smile. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. he chuckled softly. Now? Now you live, Joanna. You take all that strength, all that love, and you build the life you've always dreamed of. Your dad believed in you. I believe in you. It's time you believed in yourself. As I stood up, my hand clasped tightly around the locket, I felt a surge of determination. Andrew was gone, but he hadn't taken everything. I still had my father's love, my mother's strength, and a future full of possibilities. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. And I knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them, head on, with my head held high and my heart full of hope. The story of Joanna Hawthorne wasn't ending. It was just beginning.